This is not a definitive history of the Rising. We make no judgments. We do not claim to tell the full story. We present for a new generation a story of what happened as the men and women who made history that Easter week describe it themselves.
Easter Monday began for Nora Connolly, daughter of the rebel leader James Connolly, with orders to travel to Tyrone in an effort to rise the volunteers in Ulster. But Owen McNeill's orders countermanding the mobilisation was to make this impossible. The volunteers who took up arms in Dublin were to be, for the most part, on their own.
It was early on Easter Monday morning that I left Liberty Hall with 5 other girls from the north to return to Cool Island with dispatches and messages from Pearse and my father. It was hoped that we would reach there before the volunteers were dispersed in answer to McNeill's instructions. When I reached Coal Island, it was to find all the volunteers demobilised, the Belfast contingent sent back to Belfast, and the other contingents scattered across Ulster. I was lucky to find the local volunteer officer. I told him that they were now fighting in Dublin, that an Irish Republic had been proclaimed, that we had seen the proclamation, and that we had dispatches from Pearse for the officers commanding. The local officer immediately mobilised his men. I know he kept them under arms for a day and a night, waiting for the orders he expected to come back for them. I have a very vivid memory of being taken after dark to a large barn-like building and seeing the volunteers there sitting and standing about, and rifles and haversacks stacked against the wall. I know they stayed there waiting for orders till our officer, fearing their absence would cause comment and arouse suspicion, disbanded them and told them he would have the chapel bell rung as soon as he received orders. But no orders came.
Peerage Beasley, Vice Commandant of the 1st Battalion under Ned Daly, was to spend much of the week on Church Street, seeing some of the most sustained and fiercest fighting.
The 1st Battalion assembled before noon at the battalion headquarters in Blackhall Street. A little after midday we marched out and took up positions at points stretching from the Four Courts to Constitution Hill and erected numerous barricades. A portion of F Company, under the command of Lieutenant John Shoulders, was stationed at the intersection of Church Street and North King Street. There was a public house at the corner, closed and shuttered, with the name Riley over the window, which it was decided to occupy. After knocking and getting no answer, the volunteers decided there was nobody there and broke in. A body of lancers, escorting an ammunition wagon, approached along the quays, and volunteers, thinking they were being attacked, fired on them. One lancer galloped up Church Street, firing wildly, and was shot down. The lance of this man was converted by us into a flagpole and planted at the centre of the cross made by Church Street and North King Street. The flag on this pole was not a tricolour, but green with a gold harp, a flag provided by Daly on the orders of the Military Council, who thought it would have more appeal to the public than the tricolour, which was popularly regarded as the Sinn Féin flag. The public house became known as Riley's Fort, and outside on the street fluttered the green flag amid a network of crudely made barricades at which pedestrians seeking to pass were held up and examined.
Simon Donnelly was second in command of the 3rd Battalion under Eamon de Valera and was also to be involved in fierce fighting by the middle of the week to come.
I went down Grattan Street and entered Boland's from the rear with my party, which would have been about possibly 24 men or 28 men.
Did anyone try to stop you?
Oh no. But when we got into Boland's, the first few had to climb the gate, take off the boat to let us in. We went in the back way, and the bakers were working away at the time, turning out bread. We had to turn them out, and some of them first thought it was only manoeuvres and they were going a bit far, till we had to adopt a more aggressive attitude and ordered them out at the point of the gun. We did allow one or two of them to stay back for a few hours to save what bread was actually in the ovens, that it wouldn't be wasted. Now, after entering the bakery, we had to set about putting in a state of fortification, putting up some barricades, punching loopholes, first detailing the men outposts here and there in case the British would make a surprise attack on us. The first thing was to post men in the vulnerable positions that the British might be likely to attack us or try to enter a position. That was the first thing. When you made those emergency measures, then you set out the men to barricading the place, strengthen the gates, fill in a certain amount of sandbags, punching loopholes and walls to which you were going to shoot and all that.
Another group, altogether different from the ordinary volunteers or the citizen army, also existed. This was the Kimmage garrison of exiles from Britain who had come over in order to take part in revolutionary activities in Ireland. Michael Collins was among this group, so was Cormac Turner.
At O'Connell Bridge we dismounted, and by way of Liberty Hall, the Kimmage garrison divided into various parties, some to the GPO and some to other O'Connell Street posts. But my own particular memory is full of the occupation of Hopkins and Hopkins at O'Connell Bridge, which Seamus Robinson, Seamus Lundy and myself were detailed to occupy. Seamus Robinson was in command of our party, but before that there was a policeman and a party of lancers. That policeman on point duty on the bridge came across the road and down Eden Quay. Seamus guessed he was going to raise the alarm and ordered me to intercept him. It was only when I threatened to run him through with a bayonet that he obeyed my order to halt. Seeing that I meant what I said, he became very apologetic, assured me he wasn't going to interfere with me in any way, and added that as far as he could see, it was a matter for the military to deal with. Without delay, he went back to the O'Connell Monument. The party of lancers approached from the direction of Butt Bridge, and when we saw them, we thought the game was up. They were escorting stores from the north wall and went by with just a sarcastic glance or two in our direction. We didn't know they were escorting ammunition. They didn't know our immediate business. So on they went towards the forecourts, where they fell into an ambush and heavy casualties. By that time we had occupied the building and were busy putting it into a state of defence. Seamus Robinson told an agitated lady who demanded to get in to go away, that the building was occupied by 300 men. The British would attack any minute, and to go away, please, and stay friends. This preposterous 300 figure later made its way into an official British report.
But fashionable Dublin was at Fairyhouse and knew nothing of what had happened. And that night, when a curious, uneasy quietness came to rebel Dublin, not many realised that the day that had come to an end was one of the most important days in Irish history. An Irish Republic had been declared, and men were in arms fighting to defend that Republic and the right of Irishmen to conduct their own affairs as an independent people.
Tuesday, the citizen army under the command of Countess Martovich had entrenched themselves on St. Stephen's Green. In the early hours of the morning, they came under heavy machine gun fire from the roof of the Shelbourne Hotel and had to retreat to the College of Surgeons, where Michael Mallon was in command. Paddy Butner was one of those under fire that morning.
I got into a hall beside Jimmy O'Shea. He was a great favourite of mine. No fear in him. And I fell asleep in the hall. And it was lovely and warm because of the fact that it was a warm day, but it was getting cold at night time. And then the next thing I woke up when I heard the machine gun fire. About 5 o'clock in the morning. And I went to make a dive to get out of the hall, and O'Shea jammed me. She said, "Get back, you'll be killed." And he held, well then I realised, you see, and he kept firing up at them. And then we realised the best thing to do was carry on and keep your head. I understand there was men already after taking over the College of Surgeons before this thing happened. Frank Robbins was one of them. It's a good job they did. Dursey was shot. He was on the roof and he was shot. we could see him, and he lying on the roof and the blood running out of him. We got orders to retreat. The Countess was wonderful. She was going around, you know, just crawling along and giving us orders what to do. Get back, she says. So we got orders to retreat back, and we retreated back along. Keep close to the railings as you can, because of the fact that, well, you had a better chance of all the bars save a bullet, you know. Whereas, and then they couldn't see it too well. So it took us a long time to get up there. It put me in mind of cowboys and Indians when I was a kid, you know, crawling along. So it was agreed to evacuate. They were going over in bunches, you see. And the big fire was being held by the few men over the roof, and the men from the College of Surgeons. A man by the name of Clark, he was shot on the steps getting into the college. But we got across to this Prouds Lane, and it was safe getting over there, very easy. And the women, a lot of girls came with us, and they went all up straight ahead and got out into York Street and got into the College of Surgeons, where they let them in there, you see. Rumour came in that the Citizen Army was wiped out, and that all the bodies was lying in the fish market down there off Mary Street, you know, the fish market there. So Bob asked me to go down. Will you go down? He said, you know where it is. And I did. You're living down there practically, around the quays. Go down and see, do you know any of our fellas? He said. So I went down, and it was easy getting around now, you see, because it wasn't until Wednesday that the people were kept in. Martial law was out, but it wasn't until Wednesday that people was getting shot at, you know, and had to keep in. We were being surrounded. So I went down, and I went in, and I had a look, and there was nearly 30 British soldiers. They were all young lads, I must certainly say. You could look at young fellas' faces, lying there. Their face was clean, neat, you know. One fella mark here, a little hole here. No blood a lot, just a hole. Another fella with blood here. And there was 2 men, and there was 2 women. And like the women, apparently like had shawls on them, like they were being drunk or something like that, you know what I mean? And the men were the same, but there was no one that says in the army, so I got back and I told Bob, and the Lois had reported in. We couldn't move out after that.
Cormac Turner's position on the corner of O'Connell Bridge was under fire that evening.
I was dispatched to GPO, where I saw James Connolly. I told him we were being troubled by a sniper who was out of range of our weapons, and he arranged to send us a Citizen Army man named Andy Conroy, who was reputed to be a good rifle shot. On my return journey, I had to run the gauntlet from that sniper on McBurney's. And as I entered the door of Hopkins and Hopkins, the bullet intended for me wounded a passer-by. And shortly after, as the corporation ambulance removed the victim, a bullet from the same sniper killed a young girl.
The 3rd Battalion in Boland's Mills had established outposts in Clanwilliam House and on 25 Northumberland Road. These outposts were to become central to the fighting within hours, but for much of Tuesday, Captain Simon Donnelly had other concerns.
There was all sorts of rumours circulating. Fellas were coming to say that the Germans were landing on the Naas Road, and other fellas that no other part of the country had risen, and these rumours were having a disquieting effect on the men at this outpost. And I issued an order that any strangers coming along, that the men were not to be allowed to speak to them, only to the section commander or officer in charge of the post. I got a request from Clanwilliam House from Section Commander Ellens to send over men and food. Now, the sending over the men was a very ticklish problem because we had none to spare. But I did send them over 3 extra men and some food.
Tom Walsh and his brother Jim were 2 of the men sent to Clanwilliam House.
On Easter Tuesday, my brother Jim and I were sent from Boland's Bakery by Captain Sean McMahon and Captain Simon Donnelly to reinforce the garrison in Clanwilliam House, overlooking Mount Street Bridge. They had told us we were going to a very important post and what was expected of us. We were given 200 extra rounds of ammunition for our Holt guns. Jim had also a .32 revolver and I a .45. On arrival at the house, we were admitted by George Reynolds, who was in charge of the outpost. The garrison now consisted of Paddy Dial, Jimmy Dial, Dick Murphy, Willie Ronan, Jim and myself. The garrison barricaded the hall door and ground floor windows with heavy furniture. Jim and I were brought upstairs to a room overlooking a considerable area of Lower Mount Street. We placed some furniture in a window, after which I went to the basement and brought up a quantity of coal. While searching for the coal cellar, I found a tailor's dummy and brought it up to the drawing room. We dressed the dummy to represent a human figure and placed it in the front of one of the windows. It was now late in the evening, and we were at our respective posts for the night. Mount Street was deserted. The silence was weird. Then away in the distance, the sound of rifle fire, which continued all through the night.
Wednesday. By Wednesday morning, the rebels were still in control of much of the city, but the real fighting was about to begin. The fisheries protection vessel, the Helga, came up the river and began to shell an empty Liberty Hall. The building was surrounded and raked with machine gun fire. Cormac Turner was still in Hopkins and Hopkins.
Machine guns on the roof of Trinity College swept O'Connell Street and turned it into a no man's land. And in the midst of one prolonged fusillade, I ate my first meal of the day lying flat on the floor. Then we settled accounts with the McBurney sniper. Through a pair of good binoculars procured in Hopkins's, he was located definitely at a central top window. The information was signalled across to the garrison in Kelly's, and Andy Conroy, using our only rifle, the rest of us were armed with shotguns, took steady aim. When the sniper appeared, the word was given, fire. There was a simultaneous volley from Kelly's, and that was that. James Connolly, realizing that artillery would soon be in action and that the DBC tower would be a conspicuous mark, sent out a verbal message to evacuate the tower of the DBC. This was misunderstood, or rather distorted, to mean evacuate the block of buildings including the DBC. Seamus Robinson cross-examined the messenger on this strange order, but he insisted it was correct. So with the men of the wireless station and DBC, we made our way to Cathedral Street, through Abbey Street and Marlborough Street. There were 10 to 20 in the party, and a few, including Seamus Robinson, successfully crossed the machine gun-swept O'Connell Street. To make matters worse, at about the same time, fire was opened on us from the model schools in Marlborough Street. As we had only shotguns, we could make no effective reply. We retired down Cathedral Street with the object of trying to get round by Thomas's Lane. But about halfway down the street, a door opened, and a woman called, "Come this way." She directed us how to get through to North Earl Street, and then suddenly disappeared. I have never succeeded in locating that door or that good Samaritan. I was then posted to the Imperial Hotel, where I remained till the end.
Simon Donnelly's men were now directly involved in the fighting, first at 25 Northumberland Road.
Michael Malone, or Lieutenant Malone, as far as I remember, he was armed with a Peter the Painter revolver, German Mauser pistol that you put on a little wooden stock and make a little rifle out of it. But he inflicted heavy casualties on the British himself and Grace, but eventually, superiority in numbers and equipment, they burst into the house, and as Malone was coming down the stairs, according to my information, he was riddled. Grace afterwards escaped through the back of the house. Now this is the first of our position to fall, 25 Northumberland Road.
How long did Lieutenant Malone hold out?
He couldn't have held out more than an hour or so.
Oh, as long as that, did he?
Well, he would have, because it was difficult to get up. To get up to his hall door, you had to climb up granite steps. Do you see? It wasn't a case of bursting in the door and getting up to it under cover with a machine gun. But that's eventually the way they got up to it, you see. They kept the machine gun going on, allowed their own man to get up to the door and burst it in. They were taken completely by surprise. When he opened fire on them, of course, they scattered and had to be reassembled by their officers. Do you see? Because we're told, I don't know now, that these troops were sent over here were mostly conscripts who were only going through their training in England. They weren't seasoned soldiers, a lot of them. The officers were, but not the men they sent over. Now, when the British had overcome Malone's post at 25 now, and they advanced on the bridge, well, when they come within close range, Reynolds' garrison opened up rapid fire and inflicted very heavy casualties. They had only a few Lee Enfield rifles. They had, I think, 1 or 2 Holt rifles and a number of revolvers.
Well, now, the volunteers in Clanwilliam House had no machine gun, of course.
Oh, no, none of it.
They had
None of
nothing
it.
but these
The whole,
primitive guns.
The whole group of insurgents in all positions didn't possess a machine gun.
The Walsh brothers, Tom and Jim, were in Clanwilliam House with a commanding view of Mount Street Bridge.
In the drawing room, there were 3 windows overlooking the bridge. If you stood on the stairs looking from this level, you would be looking through the drawing room door and 1 window onto the bridge and along Northumberland Road. This window was held by Paddy Doyle, the centre window by George Reynolds, and the other by Dick Murphy. The dummy, acting as a decoy, was placed in a conspicuous position. In the room directly overhead the windows were manned by Jimmy Doyle and Willie Ronan. Jim and I were posted at 2 back drawing room windows overlooking a portion of Warrington Place and Percy Place across the canal. About noon I saw a British officer rushing from Percy Lane, along Percy Place and up the steps of a house. I fired for the first time from my Holt gun, and for that matter from any other rifle. In the excitement I did not hold the weapon correctly. The butt hit me under the chin and knocked me unconscious for I don't know how long. When I came to, I discovered that a large piece of the granite windowsill had vanished. From that on, I fired again and again towards the enemy in Percy Place, until the rifle became so heated it was impossible to hold it. Jim was blazing away overhead, and I went up to see how he was doing. When I came down, there were 3 bullet holes in the window frame where my head would have been had I not gone upstairs. There was now terrific firing from the front of the house. Jim and I rushed to the middle window of the drawing room. There was great confusion among the enemy. They were being attacked from 25 Northumberland Road, which was manned by Lieutenant Mike Malone and Jimmy Grace. Those who managed to get past number 25 took cover as they ran toward the bridge, sheltering behind trees, even crouching in the channels of the roadway. We kept blazing away, and as one attacker was killed or wounded, another moved up in those deadly channels and passed his dead or wounded comrade. This gave me the impression of a giant human khaki-coloured caterpillar. Under cover of the bridge, groups of the enemy, led by officers from Northumberland Road and Percy Place, tried to cross the bridge. They charged in extended order of about 8 to 12 men, but in vain. Again and again this mad attempt was made until the bridge was heaped with dead and wounded. Civilians, led by a clergyman, rushed onto the bridge. 2 girls ran under the crossfire and carried away the wounded. The firing from both sides ceased until the rescuers withdrew. Paddy Doyle suddenly stopped speaking to us and fell dead beside Jim and myself, shot through the head. The armchair I was leaning on was now on fire, and Jim passed me a soda water siphon to squirt on it, but it was shattered to pieces in my hand by a bullet. I turned towards Dick Murphy to say a few words, but he too was dead. The stairs leading from the drawing room level to the upper portion of the house were practically shot away. I was going up the stairs to Willie Ronan and Jimmy Doyle when a bullet hit one of the water pipes and a jet of water hit me in the face. The house at nightfall, after 8 hours continuous fighting, was riddled, and fires had broken out around us. The terrific enemy volleys were intense, and it was almost impossible to find cover anywhere. Our ammunition was nearly exhausted. We were almost suffocated by the fumes from the smouldering furniture. George Reynolds then gave the order to evacuate the post. He stood on the landing and emptied the last rounds from his revolver into the advancing enemy. As he turned to leave, an enemy bullet found its mark, and another Irishman had made the supreme sacrifice. We knelt and said an act of contrition for George, Dick, and Paddy. Through the flames and stifling fumes, with the shouts of the advancing enemy in our ears, we 4 survivors made our way to the basement. Jimmy Doyle, Winnie Rowland, my brother Jim, and myself burst open a small window in the back door and made our way across the garden walls of Lower Mount Street.
The men who fought on Mount Street Bridge, like those in Riley's Fort later in the week, were to become iconic figures for Republicans. Desmond Ryan, who was in the GPO and who became the historian of the Rising, wrote later about inspired madness.
There is a monument in honour of these volunteers near the bridge today, and of the 13 who fought that day, at least half survived, with that strange nightmare of carnage and glory in their minds. The British column did not attempt to cross Mount Street Bridge that night, nor resume their march into Dublin. The column was reinforced by another regiment. Volunteer snipers were still at work near the bridge at a late hour that evening. The flames roared high above Clanwilliam House, the only definite news to both friends and foes that one of the most amazing battles of the week had finished.
Thursday. That morning, Nora Connolly and her sister Ina decided to leave Tyrone and make their way back to Dublin.
I was hampered by wearing my uniform under my heavy skirt and heavy shoes which I had chosen as I expected all my activities would be in the country, and by carrying a large suitcase which contained mainly first aid supplies. The revolver and box of ammunition which my father had given me when we said goodbye at Liberty Hall waited in my pockets. It was a long, lonely road. I don't remember meeting more than a couple of old men on it. I had no cheering thoughts to help me as I trudged along. Mentally, I was very depressed. The disappointments I had met and the feeling that I had failed in the task given went step by every step with me. Physically, I was very tired. I hadn't slept a good sleep since Good Friday, and even that had been a short one. The night before my arrival had brought a raid on the house, and there was no sleep after they had come and gone.
Simon Donnelly's men in Boland's Mills were coming under sniper and artillery fire.
I went over to a house at the corner of Grattan Street on the orders to come and to see if we could dislodge some of these snipers. We went up to a top room. We were first going to get out on the roof. There was a burst of machine gun fire and the chimney pot come crashing down around our head. We had to give up that, and we went into a window in the top room. And one of the lads with me had a uniform, I remember it well, he's since dead. He had brass buttons on it, and the sun was shining on this window, and apparently they got the glare of the sun, and the sniper got him immediately. Gave him a very bad wound in the leg. So we had to send back then to Boland's. We had to get him across the road under fire, back to Boland's, and then get him shifted off to hospital. The commandant sent him on, with Captain Cullen, up to the distillery tower to put up a flag, and also to send out semaphore signals, fictitious signals. This was a view to withdraw the enemy fire, because by this time the enemy had brought into play a naval gun that they had brought up, mounted on a lorry. Now when these semaphore signals started to go out from this tower on the distillery, the naval gun opened up on it.
Yeah.
But what happened was, from my recollection, that some of the shots or shells from the naval gun went over this building and went over into the Liffey, where the Helga was employed shelling Liberty Hall. And I think that the officer in charge of the Helga appears to have thought that we were shelling him, and he sent back some in the other direction. But one of those naval shells did actually fall into the bakery, but it did no harm. During all this excitement and tension, a volunteer was accidentally killed by one of our own men, and he was buried in the bakery.
How did that
Adam
happen?
Mackin. I don't know really the full circumstances of it, but I think during the darkness or some time, I think a sentry challenged him and he didn't answer, or something like that. There was something on that line that happened. But he was shot. He was the late Paddy Mackin, who was a city councillor here one time. He was buried in the bakery, of course. He was afterwards reinterred. But while the British occupied Mount Street now, they made no effort to carry out any attack or assault on our position.
As Simon Donnelly had begun to suspect, the main British forces were now concentrating their attacks on the GPO and on the forecourts. Cormac Turner was still in the Imperial Hotel.
The GPO was being shelled. The east side of O'Connell Street was burning fiercely. The fire had now spread to the Sackville Place end of our block of buildings and was steadily advancing northwards. The fire brigade had been withdrawn, and our efforts to control the flames were fruitless. As we waited on our last night in the doomed building for the moment when the advancing flames would compel us to evacuate, we heard above the roar of artillery and the rattle of machine gun from the GPO across the street, proudly and defiantly, the stirring strains of a soldier's song.
Dr. Jim Ryan was a medical student of 23. On Tuesday, he arrived at the General Post Office and began to set up an emergency hospital. By Thursday, this hospital was well established.
I think the first person that came into me that morning was James Connolly, who had a slight wound in the upper arm, slight bullet wound, which I attended to for him.
Was there much activity that morning?
Yes, there was a fair amount, you know, but there was a great deal of sniping, but I don't think there was anything else except sniping. We hadn't heard the big, as far as I remember, we hadn't heard the big guns at that stage.
How many people were in the GPO on the Thursday, approximately?
Well, I always thought it was about 120, but I saw numbers given since that were much higher than that. I don't know.
Now, Connolly's first wound was of a fairly minor nature.
It was, yeah.
When was he wounded again?
In the afternoon, in the early afternoon, he was carried in by 3 or 4 men and laid on a stretcher, and he had a very serious wound. The next time, his ankle was shattered. It's hard to say. At the time, I thought it might have been done, probably was done by a rifle bullet, but it must have been at fairly close range because it's badly shattered.
What time on Thursday was he wounded?
I think it was early afternoon, probably about between 3 and 4, I think.
Pierce took no part in actually directing operations in the General Post Office?
Not in the directive operations, no.
He tried.
He did, of course, speak to the men from time to time on the general question, giving them an uplift on the moral side, if you like. But that was
more or less political speeches.
Yeah, appealing to them, yes, to do their part for Ireland and so on. Yeah.
Dr. Ryan, what kind of a patient was Connolly?
Well, Connolly was an extremely good patient. He was a most patient man, if you like. Didn't appear to suffer. I mean, it didn't appear to give in, let us say, to his sorrow. He must have suffered terribly, but he never complained. He was very good that way. And of course, I was a very young man that time. I was really trying to see, but he left himself completely in my hands. Whatever said, he agreed. Except, of course, he didn't agree to relinquish the command.
Liam O'Brien was in the College of Surgeons, where the fighting was now minimal. But from the roof of the college, he could see the north side ablaze.
Now, that that Thursday night it went on like that the whole evening, this tremendous blazing from the north side. Out in front there was nothing, no people moving around, no people had been seen for days back, but there was one thing moving up and down the streets. There was a horse. There was a horse which had broken out from some stable somewhere, and with a harness attached to him, which was dragging along the pavement. And this poor horse was moving up and down Stephen's Green, clattering along the cobblestones, making a tremendous noise, not knowing where he was going. He'd go along somewhere, disappear, and then you'd hear him coming back again. It was weird, really. That horse has haunted me ever since. And that was a terrible sight, because it gave me at least the impression as if we had brought destruction on the city. And for the very first time, I began almost to think about the whole thing and ask, were we destroying the city and maybe destroying the country?
Friday. Early that morning, Simon Donnelly got an order from Commandant De Valera that was to puzzle him for the rest of his life. By that stage, the rebel garrisons were isolated from each other, and it was the first time the men of Boland's Mills had any sense of the destruction that was taking place in the city.
I got an order from the Commandant to evacuate the bakery and take my men up onto the railway. I done so, although I didn't see the reason of it. It wasn't brought my men up on the railway on Friday night. And this is the first time the men had seen the centre of the city in flames. You could see the fires. They seen it had a very bad demoralising effect. The huge mass of red sky and the buildings, the red reflex are way off. You know, we knew it had to be the centre of the city, because we weren't so far from it, you know, looking at direct at it. But it was very unnerving to the men, and so much so that one poor fella lost his head, and he pulled out a little revolver and shot a chap beside him. Not seriously, but realising that he had lost his head, I'd no alternative but to knock out the poor fella with the butt of my revolver to save other men, because he could have went berserk altogether and done a lot of damage. When we're out on the railway for some time, and that things were all in a state of turmoil, the Commandant gave me an order to reoccupy the bakery.
Why?
I can't say the idea. The only thing that I was worried about was that for the short time we were out of it, the British could have occupied it, could have sneaked in. And before I brought back my men into it, I sent in a few fellas to have a look around to see that things were all right before we reoccupied it. But we reoccupied it. Now, I don't know whether I think the Commandant might have had ideas in getting us out there on the railway, that we were going to make an attack in some other direction or something. Must have been something like that was in his mind, because there's no other reason, because the British the bakery wasn't threatened.
Nora Connolly and her sister had got as far as Dundalk. There were no trains, there were army checkpoints everywhere, but the Connollys were resourceful.
So it was walking again, and we started off to walk to Dublin from Dundalk. We decided that we wouldn't carry the suitcase, it might attract attention. I sent Dinah into a stationer's to buy brown paper and twine. We went into a restaurant, and in the ladies' room made 4 parcels and left the suitcase behind. No, we only looked as if we had been shopping. There was a military barricade not far from the restaurant, and another before we left the town. 2 girls with their shopping aroused no suspicion in the minds of the soldiers, and we passed through without question. We kept up a steady walk until it began to grow dark. Suddenly, at a turn in the road, we came upon another military post. We were too near it to stop to decide what we should do, so we walked on. Ina, who was much younger and much gayer than I, bantered with the soldiers as we neared the narrow space left for pedestrians, and kept it up as we went walking through and passed on, as if barricades were nothing in our young lives.
Riley's fort was now under constant fire. Peerish Beasley was still on Church Street.
Things were going badly for the British soldiers. They first took up a position behind an unoccupied barricade on the east side of North King Street. But a withering fire from Riley's fort killed some of them and caused the others to fly in confusion. They took refuge in Beresford Street, where they unwittingly came under a crossfire from our post on the east side of Church Street, and more of them fell. Lieutenant Shouldes and his men in Riley's fort dashed out and seized the rifles which the soldiers had dropped. At an early stage of the fight, one of the garrison of Riley's fort, Patrick O'Flanagan, was killed. This was their only casualty, but they inflicted heavy loss on the enemy. Every few yards in the street, from top to bottom, were barricades made of any material that came to hand. Although it was night, the street was lit up as brightly as noonday by the fires burning in the O'Connell Street area. Occasionally, the ping of a Lee Enfield bullet by my ear told me that a sniper had missed his mark. I could not see what to do to relieve the pressure on King Street without dangerously weakening our line elsewhere. Our men in Brunswick Street were completely cut off from us, and I could send them no orders. I spent the night at a barricade above the church, praying that the gallant band in Riley's fort would be able to hold out.
By late afternoon, the GPO had become untenable. An attempt was made to break out into Moore Street. Of the 30 men in that sortie, 21 died in the alley of fire that the British had turned Moore Street into. An eventual successful breakout was led by Sean McLaughlin, who'd been given a field commission as commandant by Connolly. McLaughlin was then little more than a teenager. Dr. Jim Ryan was part of that breakout.
We went from the post office door in Henry Street right across into Henry Place and around into Moore Lane. Having got into Moore Street houses, then we began breaking through from house to house. Everybody got across Henry Street safely. Crossing Moore Lane was the real danger point. From getting into the opposite courtyard where they all entered into the Moore Street houses.
Well, now, who was in charge at this stage? Obviously, Connolly couldn't have been.
Well,
or was it?
I'm not too clear on that because I was nearly the last leaving the post office as we had a casualty. A person dropped a hand grenade accidentally and it wounded 4 men. And I was delayed while I was tending to their wounds and getting people to carry them off. But when I arrived, or shortly after I arrived in Henry Place, a young man called McLaughlin took control. I hadn't seen him before. He got us all to fall in, into proper order because we were more or less in groups and all making suggestions of what we should do and so on. And he got us into order, and then he proceeded to get barricades erected and that sort of thing. But gradually the men filtered through anyway into the back of Moore Street and into the houses along the right-hand side of Moore Street going up.
Now, where was Pierce at this stage?
Well, Pierce was with us at that stage, of course. Pierce must have been the last to leave because he stood at the door as we went out and he dropped his sword now and again for 2 men to run across, and then 2 more, and then 2 more. And he remained there, certainly remained there, was there when I came out, and there were very few after me coming out. Getting across this Moore Lane, which is going from Henry Place down to Moore Street, was a real danger point because the machine guns appeared to be playing on it all the time. And when I got across into a little courtyard opposite, I found 16 men actually on the ground. Of course, there's no place else to go, lying in this little courtyard, waiting to have their wounds dressed.
Friday was to be the last full day of the insurrection for the GPO garrison. Through the night, spasmodic firing went on in parts of the city. The British were moving in heavily on all sides.
Saturday. O'Connell Street had been reduced to rubble. The Connollys, unaware of this, had got to Balbriggan.
On again. My feet were burning. Behind hedges were newly ploughed fields. They looked so cool and inviting that we slipped inside the first gap we found. I took off my shoes and stockings and plunged my feet into the cool earth. It was so quiet, so cool and restful that I must have dozed off, for I wakened suddenly to the sound of the booming of big guns. We looked at each other in horror. "Dublin," I said, and pulled on my shoes and stockings. We were out on the road, face towards Dublin again. After some time, a motor car pulled up and offered us a lift. He could take us as far as Swords. Thankfully, we accepted. Here and there along the road, we saw the telegraph wires were down, and our good Samaritan carefully noted each place to inform the authorities. He drew up near the police barracks, and there we thanked and left him. I think it was near Santry that we were horrified to meet a column of British soldiers with a gun carriage and camp kitchens. "They're leaving Dublin," I said, "leaving Dublin. Can that mean we are beaten?" At practically every door in Whitehall and Drumcondra, men and women were standing. There was a horrible smell of burning, very like water spilled on hot ashes. No one seemed to be speaking to each other. Those who were walking towards us stopped every now and then to look back towards the city. Everything was very quiet. The sharp snap of a rifle now and then seemed extraordinarily loud. We went to a friend's house in Clonliffe Road. Two of the girls were at the door. They looked at us, and we looked at them. We were pulled inside, and one said in a voice full of rage, "They're all dead and slaughtered. The few not dead are prisoners." She battered us with words. When she fell quiet, I asked, "My father?" "Some say he's dead. Some say he's wounded. Some say he's a prisoner." I could only look at her. That's all the news we can get about anyone.
At number 16 Moore Street, Hanlon's Fish Shop, the final headquarters of the broken army of the Irish Republic was established. Here, the last meeting of the provisional government took place. A decision was taken, following a certain amount of discussion, to order a ceasefire and to seek an arrangement with the British military commander. Commandant McLaughlin, on the instructions of Pearse, issued the order for an hour's ceasefire. A plan of McLaughlin's to fight through from Moore Street was supported by Pearse, but the majority present opposed it. The British were quite surprised when Elizabeth O'Farrell, a young Red Cross nurse with the Republicans, approached a barricade under the protection of a white flag and told the man in command that Patrick Pearse wished to have talks with the British military commander. This request was curtly refused, and she was told to inform the insurgent leader that unconditional surrender only would be accepted, and that James Connolly would have to be brought along on a stretcher when Pearse gave himself up. Pearse returned to the British side of the barricades at the top of Moore Street with Elizabeth O'Farrell, and at 2:30 surrendered to General Lowe. At 3:45 he issued a statement. In order to prevent the further slaughter of Dublin citizens, and in the hope of saving the lives of our followers now surrounded and hopelessly outnumbered, the members of the provisional government present at headquarters have agreed to an unconditional surrender, and the commandants of the various districts in the city and county will order their commands to lay down arms. P.H. Pearse, 29th of April, 1916, 3:45 p.m. Dr. Jim Ryan was one of those in the Moore Street area.
Of course, I saw James Connolly a few times on Friday night and again on Saturday morning, but I think it was about noon. Somebody told me Connolly wanted to see me again, and I went along, and he told me that he wants his wound dressed, and there was a man shaving him, and he seemed to be preparing himself very carefully. So then he told me, he said, "I'm going to the castle." Now, I was rather surprised, but he didn't say any more, but I was dressing his wound. But when the others went away, he began talking to me very freely that Pearse had gone to the castle to arrange a surrender and had sent for him, and he was being brought there to confer with Pearse about the surrender. I said to him probably, "What's going to happen?" Well, he said, "We'll be all shot, but you'll go free."
Among those who surrendered from the Moore Street group of insurgents was Desmond Ryan, who later became the historian of Easter Week. He recalled the surrender as he and his comrades came into Sackville Street.
As we lined up in front of the Gresham Hotel and watched the volunteers from the other positions marching in under white flags, with smouldering ruins and long lines of British soldiers for background, while Red Cross wagons glided past us as silently as ghosts. Right across the street from us came the men of the Four Courts garrison, with Edward Daly, Pierce Beasley, and others of their officers at the head.
And Desmond Ryan's namesake, Jim Ryan, the medical officer of the Republican forces at the General Post Office, was also a prisoner.
Well, we were lined up, and my recollection is that we were moving through O'Connell Street about 12, and I saw the flag flying over the post office still, soldiers trying to get it down, but they hadn't succeeded in getting it down, the tricolour.
Were there people in the streets?
None in that part. When we came along to the side streets, we got along beyond Dame Street, and from then on to Thomas Street, and along there they were all in the side streets.
Was there any reaction from them, Doctor?
They were most unfriendly.
How did they manifest this?
By encouraging the guards to finish us off there and then. But I think they were mostly, of course, people that had relatives in the war.
Where did you go to?
We went to Richmond Barracks, which is now Kehoe Barracks. The detectives were there, and also the prisoners we had in the post office, the officers, pointing out those who were in control and that sort of thing. And the detectives were picking out certain men, bringing them away, and when they had picked out all their men that they thought were important, the rest of us got a tin of bully beef and a biscuit and marched onto the North Wall.
As some of us were marched off from Richmond Barracks on the Sunday night to the North Wall along the quays, we passed the abandoned barricades of the Four Courts men, deserted cars and tumbled planks, and here and there some smouldering ruins where they had fought. And in Stafford Barracks there were Four Courts garrison men who told the thrilling tale of how their fight had not ended with Daly's formal surrender, of which they were unconvinced until an order was brought to them signed by Pierce on Sunday morning. 58 volunteers behind the North Brunswick Street barricade and cut off from the main Four Courts body and the Church Street men refused to surrender until this order arrived. And those who told us of that last episode in the Four Courts story laughed as they remembered how their leader had said, as he finally surrendered to a dumbfounded British officer, "We only expect the treatment of the men of '98.